Way back in the 6th grade, I made a decision, a choice that changed the history of my life, and it had to do with music. See, in the 6th grade, I was playing in the concert band. I was playing drums. Well, more specifically, the bass drum. Now, we had about 26 drummers in this band class. We had so many drummers, we didn't have enough drums for them to use. But because our music teacher was a pretty cool guy, he decided he didn't want to kick anybody out, so he took these two big, long wooden benches, put one on top of the other, and most of the guys played with their drumsticks on that wooden bench, but I got to play the bass drum. Now, I didn't know it until a couple years later, but the reason I played the bass drum was I was the only drummer that could keep steady time. And our drum teacher, our band teacher, wanted somebody who could keep steady time. He wanted that downbeat for the rest of the band. But you see, I got hooked on drums as a result of that. And I started watching bands in concert, and I started watching bands on TV, and I noticed something about every band. Every band had a drummer. They were always in the center of the stage. They were sometimes on these little platforms. Drummers were famous. I wanted to be famous when I grew up. But secondly, because drummers were famous, they made a lot of money. I wanted to have a lot of money when I got older. I was going to become a professional drummer. But third, because drummers were famous and they made a lot of money, they drove expensive, fast cars. I loved expensive, fast cars. I knew that's what I was going to want. And fourth, drummers had the other thing I knew I was going to want when I got older. Not only were they famous, not only did they make a lot of money, and they had these fast cars, they had women. That's right. I knew that's what I was going to want when I got older. But you see, I had one simple problem. If you're going to be a professional drummer, you got to have drums. I had no drums, and I had no money to get the drums with. But Mom and Dad had money. They could buy me drums if they wanted to. So I went to them one day. I said, "Hey, Mom, Dad, guess what? I've decided what I'm going to be when I grow up. I'm not going to be an astronaut or a cosmonaut or a police officer or a fireman or a cowboy, none of that stuff. I'm going to become a professional drummer." Now, I got to tell you, they just stood there looking at me. It was like, "Hello, is anybody there?" But they just looked at me. And then they said their famous line. Oh, they didn't say no. They said, "Oh." You see, my mom and dad were into "oh." They said, "Oh, you want to be a professional drummer? Uh-huh. And you want us to buy you drums? Uh-huh. Just like you wanted to learn how to play the piano, the one that we bought for you that's sitting in the living room." Now, anybody here play piano? Oh, maybe you guys had my teacher. My teacher was older than dirt. I'm telling you, this woman looked like death eating a cracker. You know, she's kind of like the Energizer Bunny, man. She just kept on coming to my house week after week. Now, she had this thing with rulers. Now, it wasn't a normal plastic job, but she had this thing. I'm sure it was custom made. It was 18 inches long, solid maple, and right along the edge, it had this metal strip. And I could never get my hands to do the right thing, you know, with the scales and all that stuff. And she would sit next to me on the piano bench, and every week she'd do the same thing. I'd see it coming out of the corner of my eye. She'd quietly, silently reach down. She'd grab that ruler with her bony fingers. She'd yank it out of her purse, and she'd whack my knuckles. I said, "Mom, Dad, I don't have to put up with this anymore. I'm just not doing this." I said, "Mom, Dad, I really want to be a drummer. Buy me drums." And for the second time, they said, "Oh." No, they didn't say no. They said, "Oh. You want us to buy you a drum set, and you want to be a drummer?" That's right. Just like you wanted us to buy you a clarinet, the one that's sitting in the closet. Now, how many of you play clarinet? Now, can you guys play like real songs on it and stuff? Man, I admire you. You know what? I got a picking hernia blowing that thing, man. My eyeballs bulged out. There was stuff all over the floor. It was ugly. You did not want to go there. I said, "Mom, Dad, I'm really serious." And I said, "Well, if you're so serious, then you save all your money and you buy your first drum set. And if you stick with it, we'll buy you a really nice second drum set." Now, I know what they were thinking. They're thinking, "We're safe, man. This kid has no job. He has no money. We're off the hook." Wrong. You see, between 6th and 7th grade that summer, I got myself a job. I got a paper route, and I saved every dime I made. And I had some money put together, and I went in and I got my first drum set. Now, it wasn't much of a drum set. It wasn't a nice set. But, you know, it had a big bass drum pedal. It had a snare drum. It had the hi-hat. You know, the cymbals would go up and down. It had a ride cymbal, and it had this kind of strange-looking thing. It was kind of cool, actually, coming out of the bass drum. They called it a Chinese drum. Why? I don't know, but that's what they called it. So now here we are. I got my drum set. Now, second week of 7th grade, I'm walking down the halls of school, and these guys come up to me and they go, "Hey, yo, Russo." I said, "What?" I said, "We want you to be in our band." I said, "What band?" And they told me the name of the band. I said, "What do you guys want me to do?" They said, "Play drums, you dummy." I said, "You guys don't even know if I can play." And they said, "Rumor has it you got a drum set this summer." I said, "Maybe." And they said, "The guy we got now, he's got this little toy, literally a toy set of drums. He's got 2 bongos he plays with his fingers. That's it." They said, "He's out and you're in." That's how I started my career as a professional drummer. But you know, by the end of that year, we were so cool. We were making money. We were playing for parties and dances and grand openings of stores. In fact, we were called the New Edition. That's right. And we had uniforms. That's when uniforms were really cool. We had white pants, white shirts with big red polka dots. I mean, that was our outfit. Oh, it was bad. It was cool back then, but it was bad now. You know what I mean? But that was it. That was our start. And I knew in my heart that someday, just someday, I was going to make it to Hollywood, and I was going to be a famous drummer. And I was going to have the fame, and I was going to have the money, and I was going to have the fast cars, and I was going to have the women as well. Well, fast forward with me to my senior year of high school. I'm your average teenager. I've got, everything that the average teenager has. I've got homework. I've got tests. I'm involved in athletics. But I've got a couple other things that, make me set me apart just a little. The biggest thing was the music. You see, I was playing by that time in bands with guys that were much older than I was. We were opening up for other bands, big name bands like Santana and Fleetwood Mac and others. It was unreal. And see, we were playing in nightclubs on the weekends. And I was so young, legally, I was not supposed to be there because they're serving alcohol. I was underage. But I was a member of the musicians union. And as long as I played music, I could stay in the building. Once the music stopped, I had to go outside the building, take my breaks. That didn't stop the bartenders from coming out and going, "Come here, Steve, want something to drink?" "Oh, it's cool, man. You're the drummer." "Yeah, it's all right, man." Then stop the other guys coming out going, "Come here. Dude, you want to smoke up on this thing, man?" No, don't. No, you're not paying for me. You're cool. You're the drummer. I wasn't thinking about the choices I was making or the consequences. Do you? Every choice has a consequence. And how we choose to live today will determine. Now, I won't tell you all the dumb skinny jokes because you'll say, "Man, why in the world does this guy come all the way from Southern California to tell us skinny jokes?" Like I was so skinny I had to run around the shower to get wet. You stand sideways, stick out your tongue, you look like a zipper. I mean, they're stupid jokes. Nobody would tell these jokes publicly, Drink tomato just look like a thermometer, They called me Sticks, not only because I played drums, but because my legs were so skinny, they looked like two pieces of spaghetti with hair on them. It was terrible. I mean, I won't tell you that stuff because otherwise you'll. But anyway, the other part of it was I had dark curly hair. I hated dark curly hair. I would have done anything for straight blonde hair. In fact, I tried to blow dry my hair straight. Do you know what happens when you do that? It's like, boom, major fro, Man. I couldn't hardly go through a doorway because of the fro, it was so big. And then on top of that, I had two fangs sticking straight out. It was like, "What type is your blood?" Kind of a Dracula thing. And if I laughed or smiled, I had to cover my mouth. And the worst part of all, it was my mother's fault. You see, I had this huge, honking nose. My mother gave birth to a 5-pound nose, and my body grew off it, man. I'm telling you, it was bad. And I hated myself. Man, I'd stand at my locker, and I would curse God. And that stayed with me. And here I was teaching drums, and I didn't want to let my guard down because you know what? I didn't know. I never knew growing up if somebody liked me for me or just because I was sitting behind a set of drums. And so these people come in and take lessons from me. And they'd see pictures of me with famous people on the wall, and I'd show them how good I was. And, I'd teach them some drums, but I wanted to make sure that they just knew my ego was horrible. But, God has his ways of getting our attention. Does he have yours? We're not here by accident. In fact, if we take God's word, the Bible, seriously, it says that God has planned all of our days out. Before you and I were even born, God planned for us to be here this week together. Incredible to think about that. But God got my attention through a young man named Robbie. Robbie was 12 going on 13. I was 19 years old at that time. And Robbie came in from the very first day, very first lesson. He knew I was good. He acknowledged that, but he started talking about his best friend. Now, I got to tell you, I was angry with him. I thought, "You dumb little kid, don't you know who I am? I mean, I'm the hottest thing since drumsticks were invented, or at least I will be someday. And you're talking about your best friend. Man, you better start worshiping me because I'm the man." It was sick. But every week Robbie'd come in, he'd talk about his best friend and all the things he and his best friend would do in the relationship they had. And I couldn't be honest with him, but he'd leave And I'd say, I want what he has. Because I don't know who my friends are. I don't know who I can trust. But I had trouble inside because I wasn't supposed to want what he had. He was supposed to want what I had. So finally one day I thought, you know what? I can ask Robbie what his best friend's name is, and it's going to be okay. He'll never know why I'm asking. So Robbie came in, this is about 2.5 months after he started taking lessons from me, came in the studio, and I said, hey, Robbie, you've been talking about your best friend, but you've never told me his name. What's your best friend's name? Without any hesitation whatsoever, he said, Jesus. Now, I'm clueless. He's talking about Jesus of the Bible. I think he's got this little Hispanic friend named Jesus, you know? I thought, hey, that's all right, man. So I asked him what his last name was, thinking he's going to say, you know, Jesus Alvarez or Martinez or something like that. So I said, that's cool, Rob. Like, what's Jesus' last name? He said, Christ. He said, he can be your best friend, too. I went, whoa. This little dude talks to God, man. Now, you can understand something. I was raised in church. We stopped going when I was 10 years old. I never heard about God's love. I never heard about Jesus dying on a cross for me, any of that stuff. And that's what Robbie was talking about. Well, then Robbie's parents bought me a Bible. It was a Bible that I could understand, and it was in a language that was readable. Then they invited me to go to church. So I started going to church with them. Whew. It was tough. You know why? The music stunk. Big time. In fact, I think my piano teacher's brother was playing organ. This guy was so stiff, you know. Man, it was bad. And I kept thinking, you know, God, if you are real, heal this guy, you know. Do something or take him home. It was bad. But that pastor would get up and he would open the Bible and he would talk like he really knew who the author was. So this went on for months and months. And when I was in town, I'd go to the church. When I was out of town, obviously I couldn't. And I was just getting little bits and pieces about God. Then one day, Robbie's mom said, you know, Steve, I've been telling you for months now about Robbie's aunt and uncle, my brother and sister-in-law, Billy and Danielle. They're entertainers in Hollywood. I said, yeah, I remember you mentioning them. She said, they're coming up to do a big show, and I've told them about you, and they would like to invite you to come to their show. Unbelievable. I go to the show. They were so talented. They had this great band, and they're singing and doing all this stuff. And I got to go backstage and meet them. And it was like meeting Ken and Barbie in the flesh. I mean, like, she was so beautiful. It was like, and he was so good looking, it wasn't normal. Now, gentlemen, just you and I are going to talk here for a sec. If you're a real man, you got an ugly spot someplace. You all know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, there's an ugly spot someplace if you're a real man. I wanted to pop this guy. Boom. Okay, now you got an ugly spot. You're normal like the rest of us. This dude was normal. So we went out to get something to eat, and they said, hey, you know, we're looking for a new drummer to open up a show with us in Hollywood. Do you think you might be interested? Inside, I'm going, yes. And outside, I'm going, the contracts, negotiation, money, and, So they said, hey, listen, we're going to be here in town for a few more days. Are you doing any concerts or stuff where we come here? And I said, sure. So they came to hear me play. We went out to get something to eat. They said, you demand. We want you to move to Hollywood. And inside, once again, man, I'm screaming outside. I'm just trying to hold it in. They said, we're coming back up for the Christmas holidays. And they said, why don't you take some time? Could you take some time with us and go back down to Hollywood? We'll introduce you to the rest of the band. And we'll kind of give you a feel for what's going on. Do you know what we talked about the whole time driving from San Francisco to Hollywood? Jesus and their relationship with Jesus. I had never met people that were so talented, that had everything I wanted, that knew Jesus. I mean, the only Christians I knew in high school were like geeks for God. You know what I'm talking about? We're talking major dweebs. We're talking these people were just nerds. I mean, the guys that had cars, it was like skateboards with bodies on them, you know? They all had these plastic pocket protectors, like little pins in there. And they didn't do sports. They didn't do music. But here's these very talented people that know Jesus. They said, Steve, do you know how much God loves you? I said, I'm not sure he could love me. And they read this verse to me. It's found in Romans chapter 5, verse 8. But God showed his great love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. They said, do you know you have a disease called sin? And I always used to think of sin as, robbing a liquor store or, killing somebody or whatever. And I said that to them. They said, well, yeah, those are sins. But they said, you inherited a disease called sin from the first man and woman, Adam and Eve. And they said, unless you get to the remedy, you're going to die from this disease. I said, what's the remedy? And they said, Jesus dying on a cross for your sin, shedding his blood for you. They said, see, that's how God demonstrated his love for you. I'd never heard that before. I didn't know about love because, you see, my parents didn't love each other. And I was never sure if the girls I were going out with, and I didn't know about love. This was a different kind of love. Then they talked to me about being part of God's family, and they said, if you decide to accept Jesus Christ into your heart and life as your Savior and Lord, you can become part of God's family. They told me what John 1:12 says, that he gives us the right to be called his children if we believe in him. Whew. See, again, I didn't know about family because my family split up. And a lot of my extended family was broken. They said God's family never breaks up. It's forever. I went, wow, that's incredible. And then they read me some verses from 1 John chapter 5. I think it was like verse 11 to 13. And this is the testimony that God has given us life. And this life is in his Son, those verses said. He who has the Son has life. He who does not have the Son of God does not have life. They said, Steve, do you ever feel like you never have enough? I'm just thinking, yeah, the car's never fast enough. The woman's never pretty enough. I never have enough money. The concerts, the recording. And I said, yeah, you're right. They said, only Jesus can satisfy you. He's the one that can make sense out of all of it for you. All week long, we're going to all these clubs and meeting musicians, and I wanted to know more about Jesus. So by Thursday night of that week, I got down on my knees in the living room of their home in Hollywood, and I surrendered. I got on a plane the next day to fly back to Northern California. I had to do a big show on New Year's Eve in San Francisco. And my girlfriend at the time, Sandy, met me at the plane. And I was so excited to see her and tell her what happened. And it was like one of those slow-mo romantic movies, you know what I mean? Where you see the man and the woman running towards each other. And we grabbed each other, we embraced, huggy body, kissy face, how all that stuff goes. And she says, well, did you get the job? I said, Sandy, you won't believe it. I got so much more than a job. She goes, what could be more than a job in Hollywood? I said, Sandy, I gave my life to Jesus. And this is what she did. She started backing up. And she looked at me real strange. She said, what, does that make you a priest now? 2 weeks later, we were history. I said, oh, that's cool, God. So that's how it works. I moved to Hollywood, started playing with Billy and Danielle. It was called the Harper and Rose Show. We had a chance to entertain the biggest stars of movies and television. I started playing for the Disney Corporation. We were doing all kinds of things. It was unbelievable. The recording opportunities happened. I was there. I was making the money. And, I forgot about God. Yeah, I wish I could tell you I was becoming this supernatural spiritual giant. But I put God in this little box and put him in the back of my life and said, God, I got places to be and things to do and people to see. And when I'm old and, I'll be a missionary to Bunga Bunga land for you then. But, could you get out of the way now? I got things to do. Well, once again, God has his ways of getting our attention. And I was getting phenomenal offers in the music industry. And I also started playing with a Christian band at that time. And to make a long story short, one night I was doing Christian concerts at camps or whatever, and the next night I'm doing a secular rock show. I was caught with a foot in both worlds. And finally, I made a decision that once again would change the history of my life. You see, the decision to receive Jesus changed my destiny, but this decision changed the direction and the history of my life. I decided to get out of the music industry. You see, I said no to rock and roll so I could say yes to Jesus,
the solid rock, and put me where I am today, traveling and speaking. We have a daily radio program, a weekly television show, writing books, and having an opportunity to interact with people like you. I've been in about 18 countries and I think 33 states, almost all the provinces of Canada. It's unbelievable, but you see, it all goes back to somebody just like you, a teenager who had the guts to say, Steve Russo, you need Jesus. He's the one that's missing in your life. I'm going to challenge you to establish a relationship with Jesus Christ if you don't already have that relationship. And if you do, I'm going to challenge you to go deeper than you've ever been. Because men and women, I believe with all my heart that you and I are in for the spiritual fight of our lives. We live in a culture that goes completely contrary to everything God's word teaches. And if we are going to be the people God designed us to be, if we are going to impact this world and make a difference with our lives, we are in for the spiritual fight of our lives. Because the living God transforms your heart and your life.